On this week's episodes of Crowdfunding Nerds, we're joined by Galen McCown of Galen Games, and we discuss everything Gen Con. We talk about pitching your game, A/B testing it, and using your results for ads, setting up curveballs that arise during setup, promoting multiple games in one space, and more. I also jump in later because I forgot we were recording, and I don't usually take meetings on Tuesday, so I do come in later, so you'll have to find me there. Let's jump into it.
Game begin.
Let's go.
Lightning bolt, Facebook ad, Facebook ad.
That's awesome.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another awesome episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. I'm your host, Andrew Lowen, and I'm joined at the moment neither by Sean nor Rick. Instead, I have Galen McCown with me. He's actually was a guest on the podcast a couple of years ago. He runs Galen's Games, and galensgames.com has a really interesting blog where he's focusing on just kind of chronicling the journey of being a board game publisher and ramping up into something that can, I don't know, maybe be a full-time income or something like that. What's the did I frame that right? How would you frame your blog?
I mean, that'd be amazing. I'm happy with my day job as well, but I have been able to go to part-time. Everybody has their own versions of success. Right now, it's about kind of paying for itself and being able to get my games out there, right? It's a vehicle for my designs, though I am evolving into more of a traditional publisher in the sense that I have signed some games and have some coming out from some other designers as well. So I'm always exploring. I've always, I'm open to it being successful. But for now, it's just about how to break even.
Yeah, it's funny because I find when I launched my company, Lowen Games, I felt like, we did that with the first campaign of Deliverance. It was like a very expensive hobby. I was in debt beforehand, getting all the art and, marketing, graphic design, everything done that needed doing. And it was like, we made over $300,000. It was like, I was able to repay that debt. And then, with the pledge manager money of, people paying for their shipping and whatnot, I was able to deliver no problem. But I made plenty of mistakes and saw how, in essence, if I was a more seasoned, board game publisher, I would have been able to be financially solvent during that time. But because I was in $60,000 in debt when we launched it, it was totally break even, and we sold 5,000 units of our game and learned a lot of lessons along the way. And now what's fortunate is with our next Kickstarter, we are not in debt because of the first game. So I guess technically we did make money. We made money too, but not enough to reprint the game on its own. We made enough to do all the design, pay all the people, all the artists and everything like that to get their parts done and launch Kickstarter without that big $60,000 of debt. And now it's like, I now need to fly. Like, this is okay. We had round one, and now round two is like this. I can't just run to Kickstarter every time I need to reprint this game, right? So it's very interesting.
No, and that's amazing. It's a great story. I mean, I don't know how you feel. I definitely recommend to people as I think back with just starting with something small. Not what you did was very high stakes and it paid off, right?
Yeah.
And I think, but you are bound to make those mistakes. I don't think there's any way around that. And so kind of limiting your risk a little bit, dipping your toes in the water, getting an email list with a print and play or something along those lines. See how you feel about the whole thing before you dive all the way in. I mean, that would be, if I were to go back, that would be my approach, but I don't know.
Yeah. I remember reading this one article on Stonemaier Games. Jamie Stegmaier has a blog like filled with Kickstarter lessons, and I think it's required reading for anybody that's interested in jumping into this industry. But there was one article that he wrote long time ago that I read, and this was at this point probably 7 years ago, and it said, what game should you design, the big one or the small one? And if it's your first project. And his conclusion was design the one that you're most passionate about. And because designing a game itself, the actual process of design is a huge amount of labor and a lot of difficulty. So you're going to want to quit at some point. If you're not to the point where you want to quit, then you just haven't been working long enough, and you have to kind of make it through that. That I don't know, the bog of wanting to quit in order to make it to the land of publishing something. And so I thought, okay, he's talking, he recommends the one that you're most passionate about. I have this idea for a card game. I have this idea for a or for roll and write. But there's this one game that just, I really want to see exist in the world so bad. And it was, mine was Deliverance, but there are people out there that have their own. It's like, I really want to make this thing. And the one they're passionate about, I remember interviewing Adam Rayberg from Adam's Apple Games, who did Planet Unknown, and it was like his third or fourth game that he did, but that was his magnum opus, if you will, the one that he knew, this is the thing that I have that's special. And but he honestly, he probably couldn't afford to make it right away. And so in some ways, I almost feel like when you design the small card game, if you have that really incredible game that you're like, I need to make sure this exists, that game can be motivation to get the other smaller games done, if you're in that position, right?
Yep.
So
absolutely. And I think and just help develop you as a designer, right? Go through all those gauntlets of play testing, making sure you can get feedback, working with artists, everything else, again, on a smaller, safer scale. Because, and I get it. And, what you described what happened with me with Super Snipers and a lot of self-publishers, right? You fall in love with an idea and you need to make it exist in the world. And I think that's a fantastic motivation. And if you can limit your stakes going in and learn everything and kind of make sure this is what you want to do. Because there's a lot to it. A recurring theme in my blogs is, if you're reading this and you're not dissuaded, you're the right kind of crazy.
I read that actually. So speaking of your blogs, and also taking it one step at a time, you just decided to jump into the deep end as far as conventions go. And you went, your first big convention appearance, if you will, was Gen Con 2024, right?
Yeah, I'd attended Gen Con the year before, as well as PAX Unplugged, as just as a designer doing things like First Exposure Playtest Hall and Unpub and running events. So I'd done that and everything, and I ended up I didn't really, I guess I did choose to jump off the deep end, but it was an opportunity. I last PAX Unplugged, as I was walking the convention hall, I ran into Breeze Grigas, who's Zephyr Workshop. He does the Aegis Combining Robots game. I don't know if you've seen that one or not, but really cool kind of anime style, Voltron style game. And so we had, and he was a supporter of Super Snipers, and we struck up a conversation. And he offered the opportunity. He was looking for somebody to split a booth with, because essentially he's been doing this for years and years and years, and he always has a booth, but he doesn't actually have any product to sell because of the timing of his fulfillment and Kickstarter and everything selling out on the first one. So it made sense for him to share, and the games had similar themes. So that was the opportunity that presented itself. Yeah,
that's awesome. He has probably the coolest name ever.
Breeze is. It's a very fitting name too. He's from California, and he's
that's crazy. Man, well, so it's a really, really difficult task to prepare and do a great job at a convention. There's it seems like there's this illusion when you go to a convention, like a big one like Origins or Gen Con or PAX Unplugged, you'll see these very large booths. Sometimes it's 20 feet wide by 40 feet long, 30-foot square. They're very large booths. That it just seems like, wow, these companies are huge. Like, you've got every convention you go to, you've got the giant 40K Space Marine, Warhammer 40K Space Marine that's like 20 foot tall. You've got big companies that have massive presences there, and large events that seem like they've been going on forever. And Gen Con and others like Origins and, as I mentioned, PAX Unplugged and all of the, there are lots of conventions around. They just seem like they keep getting bigger and bigger. Like more people want to go to them, and it is a very natural place to kind of meet your people, right? As a board game publisher, as any kind of tabletop or nerd publisher, and it's really easy to lose a lot of money when you go to a convention. So it seems like there are what I call hygiene factors, and that I often talk about in regard to a Kickstarter page. Like if your shipping is really high compared to the actual price of your product, if you have a $40 game and a $30 shipping price, that's a big problem. It's going to cause a lot of people to drop. If you had a $50 game with a $20 shipping price, it's better. If you had a $55 game with a $15 shipping price, or a $60 game with a $10 shipping price, it's starting to look really, really good, right? So anyway, but hygiene factors are just simply things that won't necessarily help you, but will absolutely hurt you if you get them wrong. I always use the did you brush your teeth before you went on a date? Like if you did, it's not going to help you get a second date, but if you didn't, it will hurt your chances of getting a second date, right? So anyway, the concept of hygiene factors applied to conventions, it's like you've got to get the ticket, you've got to get the hotel room or accommodations, you've got to figure out where you're going to be, what you're going to do, and those things are all like the hygiene factors that are essential. Like if you didn't get your ticket, it's going to hurt you, right? But it's not necessarily going to help you if you're there. If you're just physically present with your board game under your arm, it's not necessarily going to help you. And so that's what I'm most excited to kind of extract from you, is like your experience going there, what you thought, what you tried to do to make it, to expose super snipers, to get the product out there, and what you found, what you would do differently next time, and all the things. So let's talk about what differentiating between hygiene, what I considered hygiene factors that aren't going to make the positive difference for you. What are some of the things that will make a positive difference for you, that are like, okay, you got your ticket and your hotel and you're there and whatnot. How do you actually make this work?
Right. Okay, so skipping ahead to that,
we'll start with the end from the beginning.
Yeah, no, that works. I think there's probably a few things on this list. Number one, just and it's really it's something that certainly gets talked about on your podcast a lot, and you hear a lot in the Board Game Design Lab too. But knowing the pitch for your game, knowing and multiple versions of it, right? Like that was one of the things I discovered. I had to have a 2-second grab somebody as they're going by, hey, you interested in the dueling Tetris game, super snipe Tetris to the death or whatever, it's something that would just catch people's ears, and they would take a look and they'd come over and check it out. So you have to have a 10-second version, a 20-second version, and then know where to go in depth, right? So certainly with something like Gen Con, and at least with the booth space that we had too, there's some big decisions to make around are you running games? Are you running events at your table? Are you making space to bring people back and take them, kind of through the whole game? Or are you trying to, nail the sale in, 90 seconds, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, something like that? And I think at least with the size booth we have, and at least with the staffing that I had, it was really about, it wouldn't have been smart to try to run demos at the table. We ran events out other places. It's all about sales there. Gen Con is a heavy sales convention, and you have to move people through quickly. So perfecting your pitch, knowing what lights people up and being able to adjust to that was really important too, kind of like, because I can't tell them every single thing about the game. I'm not doing a full teach there. So what is it that's exciting? What am I watching for? And so I'm not I think you clearly have some background in sales. I have very little, but boy, do I remember everything I learned from it. I was briefly in between jobs, I was a Kirby vacuum salesman for a while, right? And just and I hated it. There was a lot of things I didn't like about it. I do still own the vacuum cleaner. I love the vacuum cleaner, but but that whole kind of like just the basics of sales, and don't forget to make the offer. Don't forget to say it. Like, don't wait for them to say, "Oh, I'll take it." And so I finished my 30 seconds, and it's and we have it for sale today, and we're running a special where you get this, and you get this add-on, and you get this, and it's all for $70. And you make that offer a few different times, and if they still haven't done it, you add a couple more pieces of information that might be interesting. So, you're not just going to put the game out there and people are going to walk up like a store and buy it from you, right? There's some work. So I'd say that's one piece that made a difference.
So in terms of your pitch, is this something that you had formed before you went to the convention, or was it something that you sort of adapted as you were learning and as you're getting feedback from people, as you were sort of spitting it out there, getting response from people? And so was it something that you just kind of had prepared before you went to the convention and it was sort of basically perfect, or was it just something you kind of ad hoc adjusted on the fly with people's feedback?
Yeah, somewhere in the middle. I had a pitch. I had an idea of what that was, and that's something you develop as you're creating the game. I mean, that's important for the Kickstarter page and everything else, and advertising, and you figure out kind of what works. So I came in with an idea of what works, but there was definitely a lot of adjusting as I went, and kind of seeing what works, what people were picking up on, and what would bring the smile. And it's funny because you really, there's a feeling of, because you get to do it so many times. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of times. Gen Con is ludicrous with how much foot traffic there is. And there's just this sense of flow of when you're getting it right and you've developed that right pitch, just how well that, either ops people in or ops them out, which either one is fine.
Yep.
Both are very good. And so that developed as I went. And it was fun. I would just watch for the smiles. I would, kind of have a somewhat of a sense of who I was speaking to and what might be interesting to them. So some things were, adaptable or interchangeable, but for the most part, really figured it out. And as I wrote in the blog, I had the opportunity there. They do a trade day on the first the first day there, before the big convention, and Wednesday night before it opens on Thursday. And I had the opportunity there. It was kind of much smaller, more industry focused. So there's like publishers, educators, and I forget who else they had there. But kind of a more of a networking thing. But people were coming around checking the games, and that was an opportunity to kind of start nailing that down and feeling comfortable with it, and paying attention to using my voice intelligently, which is hard because that everybody talks about that, right? Bring the lozenges, because there is such a high level of background noise that you're basically shouting at people for 8 hours a day for 4 days, which is hard. So
yeah, it's it's so crazy. I have I mean, there's so many really good points that you brought up that I want to dive into, but actually the pitch, I feel like you just can't over express the importance of having a good pitch. And you think you know what it is, but as you see how others react, it changes the way that you say it over time. And I think that having convention experience is so valuable for everything else. Like when we put our Kickstarter page together, all of the pitching that I'm using, or even the video, all the pitching that I'm using, comes from the the way that we set up the video, rather the way that we set up our Kickstarter page. All of that comes from what I saw light people up in conventions. It's like, it's the Angelic Warfare board game. Why? Because people were like, that's awesome. But when it's, I called it something else, it was like, okay, that's interesting. And you want people to light up, right? And so the right language is critical. And you can, I have the superpower of extroversion. So being around lots and lots of people is like, okay, well, let's, what's next? Let's do this again, right away.
Good for you, man.
Yeah. And that is not how you are. And there's huge advantages from being extrovert, but also huge advantages being an introvert. Like, you can actually read people. I can't. I'm like, I think everybody likes me, no matter what I say and how long I keep them. And, even if they're looking at their watch, I'm like, yeah, what time is it? Okay, let me keep talking to you. So there are other problems that extroverts will experience. But,
it's interesting you say that, because, one of the things, and I mentioned this in the blog too, that surprised me a bit was my lack of ability to read people for sales. I really was kind of surprised by that there were conversations I had where, people were asking follow-up questions and they were engaged and they were excited, and, they're taking, 2 minutes instead of the 90 seconds or 5 minutes, and no sale at the end of it. Right. And then there were others where I felt like, shutting up early because they just very stone faced and then they bought it immediately. They'll take everything, and so I do
you have any t-shirts?
Right. Yeah. I learned to kind of just, both watching for those reactions, because those are important, but also kind of trusting in it a little bit, right? Like, give everybody their due, don't weed people out that you think you're just, it's not worth it, but give everybody the pitch. You're just going to get better at it. They may circle back around. They may tell somebody else about the game. It's worth your time. Right.
Yeah. One thing that really helped me was, so I eventually, the way that I kind of distilled it down was very similar to what you recommended. I had like a 10-second pitch, and then I had like an opportunity for them to end the conversation with grace, rather than saying, oh, we got to go, we have a 4 p.m. appointment or whatever, so it was like, my 10-second pitch was, what is it? The quickest, are you interested in slaying demons by the righteous power of God? It's like so over the top. It's like, what? Okay, let's hear about this, and then it's like the 30-second pitch right after that. It's like, oh, in the game you have the thematics, what you're doing, like, who am I, what am I doing, and why should I care? And that's kind of for me, the 3 little mini questions that you want to answer in, you are an elite angel in the army of heaven, and, blah, blah, there's a town infested with demons. And so that's why you should care. And then my question to them is, would you like to hear what other players or reviewers find most interesting about the game? Or, I kind of give them an opportunity to end there. And sometimes it does end there. And what you really want, like you were saying, Galen, you want to make sure that you move on as quickly as possible. So I in sales, I want to say we interviewed Dan Bow, my original sales coach, which was he was so amazing. You want to get to know as early as possible, like NO, like not KNOW. Like, you want to get to the word no. So would you like to hear more? No. That means that you can move to the next person. And at Gen Con, where you have to get to know as quickly as possible in as short, there's so many people. So by talking to the wrong person, you're missing out on all the right people, because they only have a limited amount of time. It reminds me of like Crazy Taxi. You guys ever play Crazy Taxi in like the movie theater, where you never have enough time, but you be like, I got to get to the movie theater in the game to drop my person off. And if you picked somebody up that required a trip that was too far, it's like, dang it, just missed all. But anyway, yeah, so it seems like the pitch is so key. And so, like, would you agree with this? So like, your 10-second pitch is a thing that I want to hear how you describe it. Like, why would you, what advice would you give for like your 10 seconds or less pitch, the thing that gets attention, right? I guess the key is that it grabs attention. Then your 30-second pitch is the thing that tells me, who am I, what am I doing in this game, and why should I care, as like thematically, why should I care? And then, you've got your 5-minute, quick demo or 10-minute demo or something like that. And then, of course, if they want to play a game, you can then they'll get the whole shebang. But but it feels like the 10-second pitch is the most important, like the tip of the spear, right? And so how would you explain, like, what if I have no idea what to say because I know all the things about my game? where should I start? What is most critical in that 10-second, like, get them or don't, right? Hook them or
Yeah,
not.
exactly. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I can definitely answer specifically. I'm trying
So
to
what is yours,
abstract
first of
from it
all?
a little bit. So this is Super Snipers. This is a 1 to 2 player dueling snipers game. Tetris to the death is the quickest way I can describe it to you. And then I just look at them, and if they're smiling, I keep going. That's it. That's probably less than 10 seconds, right? And then, but that would always get a smile. And or like, oh yeah, that's not me, kind of thing. But that was always helpful and to move on with. I think I think something that gets a smile, something that because every one of us has walked through an exhibitor hall. You're hearing pitch after pitch after pitch after pitch, right? You have to do something that you know upsets the expectations, takes people out of the rhythm, a little bit, that just like, oh, whoa, okay, Tetris to the death. I like Tetris, I like death or whatever. Like, let's, sounds fun, we even, I found couples. Oh man, a lot of my best sales were with couples, because if one was interested, they would talk the other one into it, right? They're excited. And, and you have to be careful with it, but I'd be like, just stupid things like, hey, how'd you like to, kill your husband in a game of, Tetris or whatever, something along those lines that really, just quickly, again, kind of snaps you out of the stupor of getting pitch after pitch after pitch after pitch. So,
yeah, I also think that there's this kind of an X factor when it comes to just engaging with people for the first time.
mm-hmm.
Authenticity is something that just has to be, like, you might have a worse pitch, like you mentioned, how would you like to kill your husband in a game of Tetris? That is something that is not something that you might ever recommend to one of your booth people to pitch that way. But because you just came across as like authentic, it almost reminds me of like 50 First Dates. Have you ever seen that movie?
Yeah, a long time ago, but yeah.
Okay, so the quick concept is that Adam Sandler plays a guy that falls in love with a girl played by Drew Barrymore that forgets all her short-term memory every night. So he has to win her affection and get her interested to go on a first date every day. And it's really hilarious. So all the technique that he uses one day, he tries to use the next day, and she just doesn't react the way he expected, and so he has to come up with all these different, like, new ways of getting her attention, which I find so funny. But it's so much like that at a convention, where if you just you nail it mechanically, like the words come out of your mouth the exact same way, the exact same tonality, there is some benefit to that. But I think that if you lose that human element, you really lose people pretty quickly. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I definitely agree with that. Yeah.
So one thing I'd like to get into is curveballs. Was there anything in the convention? Well, from reading your blog post, one thing that really struck me was the fact that you didn't have any access to electricity. I thought that would just kind of come with the package, because I couldn't imagine someone who had a kiosk or something, they needed to plug it in, and suddenly they realized, oh wait, I don't have any electricity, or I've got to charge my phone and I can't because there's no electricity. So maybe talk a little bit about that experience, and if there was any other curveballs that kind of came up unexpectedly.
Yeah, I very much benefited from the experience of my booth mates and my Airbnb mate there. So, because a lot of stuff I didn't know, and you won't know. So, a couple of things with Gen Con, right? You can pretty much anything you need beyond the basics of a table, which, by the way, is like a sitting table. It's not really useful as is. Again, my booth mate knew enough, had a guy come in with table risers so that, it's kind of, up more, a little bit above waist height. So you can actually do a comfortable demo standing up because you don't want to be sitting down. And there's not enough room for everybody to sit down anyway. So, you're going to need, either bring risers for your table, bring your own tables. Electricity wise, I have obviously I brought a little block power charger. Make sure the iPad for the Square reader was charged every night and ready to go the next day. It could get through the 8 hours. That was very important. Trying to think what else. Yeah, there was very little in the ways of amenities there. Everything, I mean, everything could be paid for, and that was a big part of the blog too, because you just get nickel and dimed. And part of the advice I got from Breeze, and I totally agree with, is you have to pick what areas. I mean, it's the same thing with running a Kickstarter or a lot of different things. You have to pick the areas where you're willing to pay for help. It's just not worth it. It's not worth your time. It's not worth your effort to do it. Mm-hmm. And you have to pick your areas to save, because if you pay for everything, you're lost. There's just no way.
The companies, I forget what it is, but they're all labor unions, the people that bring your your tables and chairs and that kind of thing, and they charge seriously a lot. It feels like so much. I mean, for a folding table and 6 chairs, it's like $500 or $1,000 or something like that to use it for the weekend. It's like, man, I don't live in Indianapolis, and so I need these, but if I'm going to get them, it's going to be very expensive. Or you will use a company like we used Bridge to bring in our games, but also we used Bridge to bring in our booth material, and that helped a lot. But there were still things that I needed to bring in on my own, and I'm like, next time 99% certain that I'm going to be getting tables and having Bridge bring those tables and wrap them up afterward, and tables and chairs, take them home and that kind of thing. It just it's like pretty absurdly expensive. I remember Origins, for me, all the expenses, it was about $10,000 just to get there and exist. And it was so expensive. So it's like, that's like $1,000 I could have saved by just bringing my own folding tables and chairs, So
yeah, right. Nickel and dimed is the wrong the wrong currency, but
yeah. It's like if a nickel in like the 20s.
Yeah.
So it's like, dang, I could have bought
it is intense, and as you spoke earlier about, these big companies, and they have the entire rooms in a convention hall, or the giant Warhammer figures and everything. It all scales too, in sense that, like, the challenge of making anything out of it. I mean, I know I spoke with a number of people, and there's not a lot of people making money doing this, which shouldn't dishearten you. It's almost a marketing exercise. It's a way to get your games out there and get recognized, and there's a lot of benefits to it. But I talked with one guy who worked for a bigger company, and he said, so Fern is who you work with at Gen Con if you want to have everything kind of like serviced, and they'll pick up your stuff, they'll drop it off, they'll get it to your booth, right? Like, really good service. But he had gone to get the floor pallets, and the charge was like, I don't know, like $14,000 to get them at the end of the day, to get them delivered. And this was thousands of copies of a game, but still, like, holy cow. It's it's challenging.
Yeah. Fern is who they use at Origins as well. And and they have rules about, they don't want you to just, like, you can't just bring in a truck unless it's a particular type of truck, unless you've cleared it, and that sort of thing. So just getting something from the loading dock, you can bring your own dolly and park your car out in the loading dock and then travel all the way to your booth, back and forth, or we can do it for you, and it'll cost you, right? So, but yeah, it's tough, because for me, like, when I was at Origins, I needed to save time. Time was one of, like, the most critical elements that I didn't have the ability to, I had a limited amount of muscle, so I could carry some stuff, and they obviously aren't going to worry about carrying, whatever you can carry. I had myself and a couple of buddies carry some things in, but man, all the games and everything like that, like, it's just so much more than you can do on your own. And so in some, in those cases, you just shouldn't try to do that on your own. And it's very expensive, but just bite the bullet. That's an expense that you either have to. So for me, I fortunately was able to get a lot of it taken care of by Bridge. My, they're awesome, but they always bring a box truck with all of their clients and all of the stuff that they need to bring from the warehouse. And so I just had them bring a pallet of stuff, and then they took home all of my my booth like banners and stuff, all the banners and everything. They were able to take all of that home, and
Yeah, that would
that
have been
saved a
awesome.
boatload.
I don't know if it was that they didn't have the room or they just weren't doing Gen Con, but I tried, and they ultimately directed me to Fern, which
Yep, it's tough. Yeah, so it's and they do have limited space. I know that they have to, like, if you want to get in, you've got to, it's like $350 or something for Origins, but which is really low priced compared to Fern. But yeah, it, like you said, it all adds up. Well, let's talk about the way that your booth was structured. Were you in like a corner? Were you a corner booth, or were you what they say, like an inline booth that
it was in line,
publisher left and right?
in the 2900s, so closer to one end of it. I happened to be 2 booths down from whoever the publisher was, doing Rock Hard 1977, which was one of the just huge games at Gen Con. So that was interesting because every morning, 10 o'clock, the doors would open, people would rush in and get in a giant line for that. And so you could talk to people, but you weren't making any sales until they sold out, because everybody was in that line blocking up that space. So it was interesting, but but that's where I was. I was in my booth. Yeah.
So when people were walking the aisle, there were probably people that wanted to stop, but did you feel like people got nervous because they were blocking the aisle, or did you have a way to bring them into your booth outside of the main flow of traffic? Does that make sense?
The question makes sense. It was, so 2 things. It was wide enough that wasn't too much of a problem. During the really busy parts, you could see people kind of, stuck in the flow. And I know I'm that way. I hate, stopping and having people bumping against me. And, there's I'll wait till things are a little bit clearer. So there was a little bit of that. It wasn't too bad. In terms of the amount of space there was with the booth, and because we had that kind of table on risers in the front, there really wasn't enough room to get people off of the floor or for us to be on the floor. That just didn't work out there. I saw other booths where, remove that table, put in a couple circle tables, and now you have a space people can come into. But for ours, it was just tight as could be back there.
Would you do it differently now? How do you feel about your setup?
That's a good question. I kind of got used to it, and I like it. That doesn't mean there's not a better way. I got to do a smaller local con recently, and I did like a tabletop day at the mall, and I got used to doing first of all, you got used to pitching and demoing your games upside down, right? Like everything is for the customer's perspective, and you're reaching over a table and you're manipulating things, right? And so I got very, very used to that and very good to that, and to the point where I can just dissociate and do it, because I did it so many times. So it's not a bad setup. That said, I am interested somewhat in the idea of kind of like a separate sales area from a demo area, like a round table where you got something set up and there's somebody who's just teaching you what it is, and then you go move away to do the sales part. That would be smart. But it's a small space. It's not a lot of space. And I was splitting a booth, right? And so I had Super Snipers. I had my 4 Mint 10 games that I was just collecting emails for, through cards or QR codes or whatever, but spending time on that. And then also Breeze had, the Aegis combining robots on one end where he was doing late pledges, which actually worked pretty well for him too. But there was the table space was very, very tight for that.
Yeah. So, and that's because you had two publishers sharing a 10-foot booth. Was it 10 foot?
Right. Yep.
Okay. And Gen Con is really difficult to get your own booth as a first-time publisher. A lot of the time, is this correct? Publishers will split booths or take 10 feet off of a larger company and use that. Is that
It seems
what
like
your
there's a
experience
decent
was?
amount of that. Yeah. And then they have the Entrepreneur's Alley for first timers getting in. It seems like there's some sort of merit system too, that you become known. You do the events and everything, and if you're consistent with that, you have a better chance of getting in. Something along those lines.
Interesting.
And how did you find the take up with your Minton games, was there a natural flow between your two games, or was it a bit of a challenge getting people to like change gears or pay attention to something else? How did that sort of work out, doing sort of promoting two games in one space?
Yeah. Well, and it was 5, right? Because there's 4 minutes in games. So I had to, I learned to do all 4 in about 90 seconds or less. So it was interesting. I'd have to think about it. I think, having somebody else there that can, at least having one other person in the booth that can do the pitch for the other game was great. I think they flowed very well together. There was a lot of interest in the Minton games. If I had those for sale, I would have made a killing. It was just people were really, really excited about those. And so, again, it would have been great to have for sale, but I did, I got a lot of people on the email list, which was nice, and a lot of interest. But it was a little bit of, my preference was, if people wanted to hear about both, was to start with the Mintins and then finish my conversation with what I actually had for sale. Because if I started with what I had for sale and then they want to hear about the Mintins, the sale cools off a little bit. So there was a little bit of a problem with that. That probably, I don't know how much of an issue it was, but a little bit of an issue. But yeah, I may have been trying to do too many things by doing both, but I'm happy I did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to hear actually about your. So you said you did 6. You wrote in your blog that you said that you did 6 teach events for Super Snipers, and to give a little context, what I found to be really interesting was when you've got games that are like 10-foot booths that are generally too small to actually play, but then people will say, go over, here, or, open up the app, and, they have an app for Origins, an app for Gen Con, and schedule a game, like get tickets to a game. We have open spaces on, Friday or Saturday or whatever at these times. I thought that would be really great if I had like a 10-foot booth and wasn't able to actually demo games there. It would be really great to be able to say, here is the experience, and if you want to play a game, you can. It's almost like a way, like if they're not interested yet, or if rather you're not gonna, if you have to like twist someone's arm to buy your product, it's just better to move on to the next person rather than try to convince somebody they should buy.
Yeah.
But what oftentimes playing a game can do is convince somebody that they want this, right? And so I find that being able to send someone to a demo, or schedule a demo, actually is a really powerful tool. And I was curious as to your thoughts, because you're more seasoned here than I am. What did you think? Would you have done more teach events for Super Snipers if you could have, or was it a matter of like being limited on the number of people that could help you?
Both.
Okay.
Both. Yeah. I think in my planning, I had volunteers. My thought, I didn't quite have the time to bring people up to snuff to be teachers of the game. I'd never really, gotten into that. That wasn't part of my ask for the volunteers. It was more about, having, multiple people at the booth, or having people to cover the booth while I did the teach events. So 6 was a very low number. I think I could have done more with that. I did, as you said, I had kind of 8x11 plastic stand there that with the schedule of when the events were, when the teach events were, though most of them were full at that point. There was some of them had space, so that did work out for a couple of people that came back to do the teach. But those are powerful. You have to have enough people to do it, which is its own challenge. But having those running all the time, the conversions on those were great. It's you're spending a lot more time. The events. I also learned from last year. I set the events for an hour and a half. I invariably finish them at the 50-minute mark. But having that space in between is just so vital. And in case it does take a little bit longer, the year before I did the hour, and I just found myself really crunched, especially if I had to move, to a different area. Because Gen Con's huge, right? Like just the convention center itself is huge, but then you also sometimes have events over in Lucas Oil Stadium, which is like a 10-minute walk or 20-minute walk, and like, yeah. So, but they converted so well, and that was and that feeling of kind of people finishing the game, being excited as I'm packing up. They've already gone, bought it, come back to get it, get it signed, kind of thing. Like that, awesome. I would have loved to do a lot more of that. That would have been great, and that was very fulfilling. And those people are going to play the game because now they know how to, right? Which is also very important. I'm happy to sell the game. I really, honestly, just want people to play it. That's what excites me. Yeah.
Right. And I think one of my experiences going to Origins, probably the coolest thing was, we had around 60 units to sell. I think we sold 67. Because when we sold out fully, we were like, well, you can get it on our website, or we sold out on our website, but I have copies. I had like 10 copies at my house. Like, I will sign and ship one to you if you give me your address or whatever. And they were that motivated. But a lot of those sales seemed to come from our demos. We had a 10 by 20 booth, and we had 2 demos going at the same time. I think I led like 1 or 2 of those demos. We ran 55 games, 1-hour demos over the course of, I guess it was about 34 hours of being open. So we were generally running 2 demos at the same time, all the time, constantly. And I want to say every single group, there were either everybody owned the game already and they were just really excited to play the new content, because it was an expansion that they were sharing, or somebody bought the game. I think we had maybe 1 table that they didn't. And then, there were other people that were like, what's this? And then, how can I buy it? Before they even sat down. But generally everybody wanted to come back to sit in for a demo. I think we had all of our demos were between 4 or 5 players, and it was a really fruitful thing, but it was completely beyond me. It was like a Balrog, versus hobbits. Like, I felt like the Hobbit, and Gandalf said, "This foe is beyond you." My booth team, so we had 9 people that ran our booth, and 5 of them were like, all they wanted to do is stay at the booth, because they were like the artist or the graphic designer, or that kind of thing, and they just were like, I'm here to go, to be here. And it's just like kind of a we're the team, and so they all stayed there full time, where I had other volunteers that came for like a 4-hour shift here and a 4-hour shift there, and if they worked 8 hours for me, then that was like they got their badge and everything. And so the and like accommodations and whatnot. So anyway, but a lot of those people actually stayed longer. There's people are very gracious with their time. They want to make sure you get what you need and everything, but you got to make sure not to like overuse those people, right? But absolutely. What I found was that I could not sit and demo a game and stand and talk about a game. It was impossible to be in 2 places at once.
Correct.
And I had to constantly be, in one of those places. And if I was demoing, I couldn't sell anything. And my team eventually figured out a 1-hour demo where they could get a group to sit down and play and be done with basically half of a game in 1 hour, like a full group of 5 or a group of 4, And if another group came in, they were like, oh, it's our time. Like, it's our time for a demo, like we would schedule and whatnot. And they would mark in their calendars the timing and everything, which I thought was actually really cool. People really stick to schedules at conventions. And so to leverage that is powerful. But then we had another table that it was like the first group wasn't finished, but the second group just finished. And, even though they're supposed to play on table 1, we're putting them in on table 2 because that one is now open. And then the other guys get in, and it was a lot easier to kind of juggle a lot of demos that way. But yeah, I think that one of my, I guess, reflections is that if I could have had somebody demoing somewhere else, I'd just like go over there and there will be spots available. That'd have been so cool. Probably really difficult logistically to figure that out and make it work all the time. But it would have been nice. We did sign a lot of games.
And do you think you would have made as many sales if the demos were in a different location? Because I suppose the benefit of the demos are great. This is great. And then they could just purchase it right there in your booth space.
It was very helpful to have the demo in the booth space. I will say. I'll also, there's one other thing that I kind of came back with was something I didn't expect. So, like we were talking about the pitches, you had your 10-second pitch and you had your whatever 2-minute pitch, whatever. There's also a pitch that your booth makes, which is why we use, banners and other things like that. And sometimes I would find people would stop by the booth. I was on an end cap, so they would stop and they would walk around, and then they would slow down about 3/4 the way. They would stop and actually take a look. If they were interested, that was a place that we could start talking, and then they would come over and look at the game or whatever, or we would just start talking there. And I had our QR codes kind of like to join our email list on either side, right? So they could just snap a picture and then keep walking if they wanted, or if they stopped and looked and were kind of, wondering what was happening because they were interested, then I can talk to them. And I think that booth is, in a way, the first pitch.
Absolutely.
And there were others that just walked and looked and were just like bailed because they weren't interested. And it's a way to get to know as quickly as possible without even talking. Did you find that your graphics that you used for your booth were helpful to you? What would you do differently?
So yes, I got a great, 10x8 pillowcase style banner in the back there, with a lot of, Waz art, who did Super Snipers and who did one of the Mint 10 games coming up to Dice Clash. And so very, very striking art, very straightforward. You're seeing anime characters with guns, if that's your thing. people would check it out. Like, it was very eye catching. I think too, also having, kind of, the minimum number of components, but to do a quick overview and demo with. So I would have, like, for Super Snipers, I had, one half of what the setup would be like, just your components. And, I'd just quickly explain, I'd have the mirror image across from you. Right. And Mint 10 games, kind of same thing. Some, are easy to set up in that space fully, but, just colorful, components, things that excite people, and, the table was a bit busy, but it was exciting, right? Like, people would definitely come, stop, slow down, check out. Oh, look at that cute little Mint 10 game or whatever. There was a lot of different things. That's the other thing. There was a lot of different ins on the table too. A lot of different, where people would recognize Breeze's game and then they'd come over and see mine too. So there are a lot of good catches. I think, in terms of things I would change, I think I found myself, with the Super Snipers explanation, the mirror image thing would work for some people, but it was better to show them the back of the box. But that was like, more stuff to finagle. So I think having something that just I could point to show, like, hey, this is what the thing looks like all the way set up, because you don't have room to do that. Something along those lines would have been helpful.
Yeah, that's smart.
Galen,
go ahead, Sean.
If publisher was to come to you, and who would you recommend Gen Con for? Would you recommend it that they have to be of a certain size before Gen Con's really viable for them? Or how would you pitch Gen Con to another publisher?
It's a great question. I think it's a very interesting question. I think, in terms of the mathematics of it, are you right? Do you have a single game that you're selling? Is it new? Is there some excitement around it? And what your price point is, right, is gonna help you do a lot of the math to determine if it's worth your while, right? And Andrew, you said it was $10,000 for you for Origins. I think I spent somewhere around, I don't know, $5,500, in total. So there's some quick math to do, and an estimate of how many you might sell, and understanding the prices. So I think as a publisher with one game that you think you can sell 100, 120 copies, something like that. Totally makes sense for Entrepreneur's Alley, where it's a little bit cheaper in terms of getting your own full booth. I feel like that is an exercise in marketing, not in profitability. Once you have, a few different SKUs to sell, you have enough things to sell people that your average price is going up a bit, which that was another thing that was helpful for me, is that, Gen Con, almost everybody bought everything. That just seemed to be the type of convention it was. Like, you've also got an expansion pack and acrylic upgrade pieces. my average sale was $70 instead of $45, which was great. So, just making sure you have that stuff, having things at a few different price points. You only have $10. I have something to sell you. I would recommend, along those lines. So it's a hard one to answer. I think I found it very challenging. Like I said, breaking even or being close to felt very, very good to me. If that sounds awful to you, I wouldn't recommend it. It's hard. It's hard.
Yep. Yeah, I would say that if I were to go back and do Origins again, if I had, all of my components, one of the problems is I sold out of all our add-ons. But like you said, if I could have had one single add-on that people would have purchased, I'm sure that half of my people that bought games would have also purchased add-ons, or, whatever I had. Some of them would have purchased every single add-on. Some would have purchased one because they really like metal coins or they really like acrylic standees, whatever. But that would have really increased the number of transactions for a single customer, or rather the average pledge, or I'm thinking in terms of Kickstarter right now, the average dollar sale, and the number of products sold in a single transaction. So I think that would make a huge difference. So yeah, if it's really hard to sell one thing, but it's a whole lot easier when you are going to sell to a customer to sell that customer more than one thing in a single transaction. So like for people looking forward to a future Kickstarter, you go, for me, I had a future Kickstarter, so if I got their email and sold the product, then there was a likelihood that their number of transactions with me would be higher than one. So in actuality, I don't know my true return on investment from Origins, because I don't know how many of those people also backed our Kickstarter, and it could have been, for me, I considered it kind of like break even, but it could have been very profitable after looking at, what happens during our Kickstarter. And so I think that that point is really, really good one, where if you have any kind of add-on that you can upsells are so much easier. It's like, would you like the fancy acrylic standees? And they will say yes or no. And you won't need to explain it. You already did all the explaining of Super Snipers, Tetris to the death, and which sounds really fun, by the way. So my wife would love to Tetris me to the death. She would be really good at it. But yeah, so I think that's probably one of my biggest regrets from, if you could call it that, from conventions, is I didn't have anything else to sell other than the base game. Now I have a base game and an expansion, and so the number of the average dollar sale can go up. But yeah, I mean, I think what you're doing with the mint tins is really smart, where you have 4 of them. If I buy one, I might as well just buy them all in the bundle for, if each one is whatever, $15, I might as well buy all of them for 50, or whatever. So anyway, I think that is really great advice. So any parting thoughts as we, anything that you really want to cover or really want to share based on your experience from Gen Con? Any advice?
Yeah. I think, just quickly want to highlight, something you said about how the ripple effects of being at the convention, that not the full picture of what it did for you was not entirely in the dollars and cents that show up, during that is very true. It's also, you're being seen. It's, you're meeting people, you're shaking hands, people get to meet the designer, you're meeting distributors, other people too. Like afterwards, I met some retailers that picked it up. A distributor picked up a bunch too. There was some ripple effects from it. So I think that's important to highlight. I'd recommend just people, check out the blog. It'll give you an idea of at least a lot of what you don't know going into it. I think, one of the other things that I'm excited about with the Mint 10 games too, that would have made a difference and will in the future too, is a lot of people's decision making comes down to, it's not even whether they want your game or the price point, but I can only carry so many things right now in my bag. I can carry only so many things in my car going home or on my plane trip too, right? And so there's a lot of considerations around that. So I am very excited to be offering something that, like, you have room for this. You can fit this in your pocket right now. Like, there's no problem in just kind of having and I suppose that would be a recommendation in general, just having something that's easy impulse buy there, whether it's a game or an add-on or a standalone small little thing, something like that is certainly a good idea too.
That's a really good point. I actually had people buy our game. Deliverance is a big 12-inch square by 6 inches tall almost, and they're like, I just can't carry this around for the whole convention, but I want to buy it, and you're going to run out or whatever. I need this, but I'm not going to be back here for like 8 hours. And so I would sell it and then just hold it in the booth for them and say,
Sure.
well, I'll sell it, sign it, hold it in the booth for you. Whenever you come by again, you just let us know. We'll pull it out from our little hiding spot, and you can have it. And so that's a really big point. So big box games it's not that they don't sell as well, but you have to make some extra considerations for your people.
Yep.
And it's a bigger purchase for those that fly in, because like you said, there's only so much room.
Yep.
A lot of people buy or bring a second suitcase to something like Gen Con, and because they know it's empty, but they're going to fill it with games on the way back. So it's pretty wild thinking like that. So anyway, Galen, thank you so much for your time and jumping in the deep end of Gen Con. That is a really there's some good gems in this one. So I really appreciate it. So before we go, how can people find you? Is it just galensgames.com?
Yep.
What about these Mint Tin games? How do we find those?
Sure. So yeah, galensgames.com is the website and has connections to most stuff. I'm also, have Facebook page, etc. I've got a Kickstarter coming up for Mint Tin games. They're all 2-player games with solo modes. Learn in 5 minutes, play in 20. That Kickstarter is launching on October 22nd, and I'm really focused on the Kickstarter being the best deal for my backers. And so that they're going to go 2 for 24 or 4 for 40. Afterwards, they're going to be 15 a piece. So these are all really cool games. Some are my designs, some are by other designers, some gorgeous art. I encourage you to check that out. 2 weeks from today. All right. Launching that, pressing that green button again. Yeah.
Very good. That's scary. Well, good luck. And
appreciate it.
I'm excited. I'm excited for them. So.
Thank you.
All right. Well, then I guess we're going to have Robot Richard send us on out.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. For more resources, articles, and to listen to past podcasts, please visit us at crowdfundingnerds.com. And if you have a crowdfunding question, we also have a page on our site where you can send a message directly to us. Please visit crowdfundingnerds.com/question. And if your question is a great question, we may include it in a future podcast. Thank you all again for listening to this week's episode, and we'll see you next week. Stay nerdy.